Jill McDonald, Municipal Co-Chair on the Service Mapping Subcommittee. First of all, on behalf of the other co-chairs, welcome and thanks for joining for today's webinar. And a special thank you to ICCS and the Joint Councils for their financial and technical support of today's webinar. Last year, the mandate for the Service Mapping Subcommittee was changed to focus on information sharing and building awareness of the concepts of the Canadian Government Reference Model and how these concepts are being applied to support citizen-centric service delivery. We are very fortunate today to have Dave Wallace and Hugh Morgan from the City of Toronto to discuss their business architecture framework and how it was used at the City of Toronto for electronic records management. I'll turn it over to them now so they can introduce themselves and begin the presentation.
This is Hugh here. I'm not sure if Dave is on the call or not. Oh, yes, he is. Okay. So can we just hold for 1 second? Okay, I'll begin with and Dave. If Dave joins us, he can jump in. We have a little bit of a technical problem, just so everybody knows that the building we're in right now the fire alarm just got activated. So I'm going to continue on with the presentation, but depending on the status of the alarm, I may have to leave. So I apologize for that, but just let people know that might be the case. So as Adela mentioned, I am the City of Toronto. I'm the head architect of the city. And the presentation today, I'm going to try and walk through a few things. View of actually what it is that we do here at the city from an EA perspective. And you'll see on the agenda. Secondly, I'm going to use the capability model as a sort of a mechanism to, again, describe how we approach the business architecture space at the city. And then finally, the last part of the presentation will give the group a specific example of how we've taken some of these approaches, methodologies, and models to actually do an architecture for a specific program. So the first section is the enterprise architecture at the City of Toronto. So we have three main goals at the city here from an enterprise architecture perspective. They're fairly general, and I would say that they are pretty common across EA groups. But they're more or less first one is to realize a roadmap to enable the vision of the organization. And again, it's a high-level statement, but it really is to come up with a common, coordinated vision for the organization. And I should make note at this point that it's really, this particular goal is not about a technology roadmap. It really is about a business roadmap to enabling the vision. And I'll get a little bit into the detail in subsequent slides as to how that does result in some technology pieces. But this particular goal is really about enabling the vision of the organization from a business standpoint. The second piece is we're trying to represent and communicate the vision through requirements. So they're understood by everybody, and that's really like a common language. So you're seeing some of the models, some of the techniques we're using is about creating that common language, that common understanding, making things fairly clear from not just from a specific solution perspective, but from an enterprise perspective, so that we'll know that complex. Okay. And then finally, the business architecture is a structured approach. So again, we're taking the models and capturing, reviewing, aligning, and we're using specific business capabilities to come up with corresponding technology components. So as I mentioned in the first bullet, this gets now down into how we represent the business requirements and capabilities into components. So there's kind of like three elements in the EA space. The first one is about understanding the long-term vision and roadmap of the organization from a business standpoint. The second one is having that vision and having the language that's well understood so people understand what it is you're describing. And the third one is having the tools and the models to actually take those elements and finally putting some low-level technology components in place to enable them. So that's what EA is at the City of Toronto. Again, like I said, I suspect that most people in the space would agree generally that those are the three main concepts of EA. The one thing that I try to emphasize here is a good portion of the EA in this context is really about the business side of the equation, and that's really what we're talking about today. So even though EA traditionally is in an IT organization, one of the things that we're trying to emphasize here is it's really a business-driven sort of practice or methodology, of which the technology pieces are subsequent components of a business vision. So why take an architected approach? So this is what we're more or less telling our clients as to when we get engaged in certain business activities, what the benefits are of taking such an approach, keeping in mind the three main goals from the previous slide. The first one is to review and improve current business capabilities and processes. So it's a bit of a transformation type concept where we're taking an architected approach to highlight those opportunities, review them, show improvements and re-engineering type process activities, and put them into a capability model. Secondly, provides context, brings clarity, ensures completeness, enables correlation. Related to the second bullet in the previous slide, this is a bit of a language thing, a bit of a communication thing, an understanding. The context pieces to bring it into context of the entire organization or enterprise, and then ensuring the completeness piece. So we're telling, again, our clients that part of the aspect of the architected approach is to bring that context into the equation, so we are making sure that things are aligned and those types of things. Third bullet, refinement in later steps become tangible RFP requirements. This is a bit of an on-the-ground bullet, but we're finding that as we take an architected approach, that when we go to do things like procurement or on RFPs or RFQs, because we've taken a very structured and architected approach, those things become tangible RFP requirements. So as you'll see again in subsequent slides, as you get into some of the techniques we use from the use case model and all those types of things, they will correlate into to functional requirements. So we're finding the architected approach puts some discipline around that to feed into RFQ requirements. And it's become very valuable to the business areas because now they not only well understand what their requirements are, but they're documented. And subsequently, when a vendor or a proponent is selected, they have something to refer back to from an architecture standpoint. And it's not just the RFP, it's the actual architecture artifact. So that's one of the other purposes for taking the architected approach. I mentioned this, the fourth bullet is somewhat related to the second one, but it ensures that enterprise level requirements are included and documented. Again, in a subsequent slide, I'll show you what I mean by that, but there's the aspect of reuse in that bullet and having that context across the organization, so there's things that can be leveraged between in the city and between divisions or between organizational units. Fifth bullet, helps governance. I think that one's pretty straightforward as we take an architected approach, and you'll see our governance model, how it sort of helps in governance. It brings the sort of the issue, it brings the solution, it puts some structure around how the governance body looks and makes decisions on certain aspects. And then finally, it ensures the technology alignment with business requirements. So we're taking a business, logical, and technology architecture approach to the city, and part of the end result of that is taking the business requirements and ultimately doing some technology alignment. And again, you'll see what I mean by that as we get more into the presentation. So at the city here, this is how we've more or less structured our enterprise architecture group. This is, again, a pretty traditional sort of model in the EA sense. It's probably a little bit of a TOGAF. If people are familiar with that, it's a TOGAF model, having the 5 main domains as part of the enterprise architecture group. So that's how we've structured it here. We have what we call domain leads for each of these areas. And actually, I have one of the domain leads with me here, Marianne Walke, and she's actually going to take us down the path of a couple of the subsequent slides. But I have domain architects for each of these areas, and they're responsible for actually defining a couple of things in these domains. First things is to put some structure around what each of those domains are and what the corresponding artifacts are when people come up with solutions. And then secondly, they're developing what we call reference architectures to make repeatable patterns for when activities or when solutions happen within the organization, we can have some common alignment and some sort of common design techniques being used in each of those areas. And then finally, each of these domain architects are actually part of the governance body, one of the governance bodies, I should say, to make sure that alignment happens. So as groups across the city develop solutions or develop some sort of an architecture, we actually have subject matter experts in the domains to review the material and ensure for its completeness, its alignment, and those types of aspects. So I'm going to now hand it over to Marianne, and she's actually going to drill down into the business architecture domain to give people a sense of, and to frame when we get into the example, what we mean by business architecture in the city.
And the fire alarm just started going off again. I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but we'll continue and hopefully it will end soon. So the first point about business architecture is the way that we're using it in the city and in many places in the public sector is it's a structured way to tackle business requirements. And the structure that we've chosen is based on the municipal reference model, which the Ontario government is using. It's been used in federal government also, which is based on programs and services, processes, and resources. So the key thing is to follow a common structure and common language so that we can understand our business across the enterprise. Businesses are usually really, really good at describing what their business is in many different ways, and the problem is that it is many different ways. And so building that enterprise common view requires some consistency and structure to have a common understanding across. So the business transformation part of it is the changes in the business. This is the delta between the as-is and the to-be and the roadmaps that are required to get there. And this is all part of the EA framework, which ties into information application technology and security and privacy. With every one of the requirements and models and structures that's involved in these domains needs to be directly traceable back to parts of the business architecture so that you can follow it into the business processes, the services that they enable, and the program mandates that they fulfill. So the next part is about the different perspectives that we use in business architecture. You'll see that these are they largely come from the Zachman framework for enterprise architecture. They're the columns in the framework, and it's just organized a little bit different in this view. So the first one is what the business does, and that's focused around the programs and the services that are delivered, how the business achieves its goals, and that's the functional column, which involves business processes. Who is involved is the roles and the stakeholders and the partners, where involves all the business locations and the networks that are required to achieve the business, when involved events and cycles. And the why column is the overall motivation. So that's where we cover things like the mandate, the strategic goals of the program, and all of the other perspectives need to all line up in order to describe how the mandate is achieved and how we measure things on each of all of these perspectives.
So the governance piece, I'm just going to jump back in here, is I just wanted to give some people a sense of, we talked a little bit about the enterprise architecture, about the business architecture. And the last piece to the puzzle in this is the governance aspect. So I've got 4 slides in here that I just wanted to sort of give people a sense of how we're going about with architecture governance of the city. And the relevance to this is when we get into the capability model, which comes after this, the governance is a cornerstone to actually realizing that capability model. So this slide is really just, it's pretty straightforward and pretty common sense from what the architecture governance ensures. But we're really, in essence, trying to increase the transparency and accountability, do some sort of controlled risk. So managing, the architecture portfolio and some of the project pieces to understand what our risk is and so on and so forth. Protect our existing asset base through the reuse. As I mentioned before, when we look at the across or the enterprise view to certain solutions, we are trying to leverage things that we have already. Obviously, the alignment of the business and technology is there, and you'll see in our particular governance, we're ensuring that by having a few layers of governance, and some of them are technology exclusive, and some of them are business and technology, so that both of those perspectives are there to ensure that alignment. And we're trying to obviously do some proactive control and monitoring, so the governance bodies are there to be there to do that proactive measurement and monitoring. There's a process, concept, and component reuse, somewhat related to the asset-based reuse. But again, it's about across organizational business units. So in the governance model, when we have business units as representatives, they can understand what it is what it means to them, and try and leverage or try and reuse certain aspects of other people's architecture. Value creation through monitoring and measuring, obviously that's a big element of the governance piece. Today we're doing the monitoring and measuring through the architecture elements themselves. As we get more sophisticated, we'll actually measure through a better portfolio lens with some real tangible costs associated with it. So at this point in time, we're really doing the reuse from an architecture standpoint. As we get more mature in this space, we're going to understand the costs and the impacts for not adopting the architecture or deviating or whatever the word you want to use for it. So we're hoping that the governance body will help, enforce or bring some of that monitoring to the table. Increased visibility and support internal process and external party requirements. Again, it's a bit of a visibility thing or a transparency thing. We see the governance bodies acting as that support mechanism. And then finally, as a decision-making body at lower levels of ensuring insight, is as again you'll see in our governance structure, one of our key pieces. And what I mean by that is at the lower level, we actually have 3 levels of oversight. And what we want to make sure of is we're not making high-level abstract architecture decisions. There are some real low-level considerations being taken when architectures are reviewed that could have strategic consequences to the organization. So that's what governance means to us. So here's the 3 bodies that we have to sort of align with some of those architecture roles. So we have 3 teams: architecture core team, what we'll call the enterprise architecture review panel, and then finally a business advisory panel. And each of those levels are escalate up through the organization actually. So the architecture core team, as I mentioned earlier, is my team of domain architects, reviewing the subject matter that's specific to their domain, and ensuring overall business and technology alignment. The enterprise architecture review panel is more of a business representative body that can make sure that there's alignment happening at the business and organizational level. And then finally, the business advisory panel is the senior management in the city, i.e. the city manager and the deputy city managers. And they're making some investment decisions based on some of the strategy and architecture, prioritizing project work, and then doing some IT spending approval. type governance. So all those things align. The way that we're using these bodies today is we go through an architecture core team to vet the structure and the content and so on and so forth of the architecture. We are using that as an advisory board to the architecture review panel, who then bring in the business context to the equation, and then they actually advise up to BAP on what the implications are of following or not following the architecture. So it's a three-tiered approach, and it's working quite well for us. There's probably a fair amount of fine-tuning to do in that space in terms of, we have some challenges from a business representation, for example. We'd like, ideally, a lot of business representation in the EARP, and we have a good amount, but, in some cases we feel like it's not enough. So there's some minor issues in that space, but essentially the governance bodies themselves are working quite well. So that's the sort of the 101 on the enterprise architecture and business architecture pieces of the city. I'm now going to jump into a little bit of the vehicles and mechanisms that the models that we use to realize some of the statements that we made in the previous slides. And one of our big pieces right now is what we're calling a business capability model. And that really is, as you'll see on this slide, is capturing and representing the organization's business, independent of an organization's structure and process, and using it as an anchor. And as you'll see again in this diagram, we're trying to put a sort of a traceability or some sort of a glue. So take what we describe as our enterprise model and try and align it with some of the business architecture, logical architecture, and physical architecture solutions that we're developing to make sure that we're actually all talking about the same thing. So this is a little bit of a language thing. It's very much a capability thing from a what is it that the city does. So when different initiatives or transformations come forward, we can provide the context to say, well, when you're talking about, for example, what I have here, financial management, and you're talking about fee collection, what is fee collection? And how does it fit into a business architecture? Because we'll have some definitions, I should say, for what fee collection is, what it's made up of, and some of the processes associated with it. But we also, at the same time, as business architects come forward, may re-engineer those things. There may be missing processes that's associated with those things, so we feed them back up into the capability map. So we have that anchor model. So again, in this diagram, we're showing how the capability is the anchor, and then we get into the business architecture, which is doing the design and the structure of the solutions, and then showing the alignment to the actual capability. When I get into the actual example, you'll see exactly what I mean by this, because there is a direct mapping, and it becomes very evident as to where those capabilities reside. We're also trying to then map them down into the logical aspects of the architecture. So we can make sure that we're, again, starting with the capability, showing an overall process or lower level process associated with the capability, and then mapping that to an actual system component needed. And the reason for doing that is once we have all of our capabilities defined and we know from a business architecture what our processes are, we're now getting to the level where we can identify which components we need to facilitate or enable the business, and those components become reusable. So you can take the processes, show which components actually enable those processes, and then have a very manageable set of components that are represented in the logical architecture. And then finally, in the physical architecture, is really about what solutions you need in that space. I'll quickly just mention, too, that one of the things that we're also doing in this space to realize some of this is doing things like an application inventory also. So we're taking our current portfolio, our current applications, we're actually tagging them with the capabilities that those applications actually enable, and then we're showing the components that are part of those applications, and then ultimately we will cost those things out, and we'll also rationalize, hopefully, some of our applications in our portfolio to align with our capabilities. So that's in essence what the capability model is. I have the next 3 slides an example of what I mean by capability, just to give people a sense of what it is that we're talking about inside each one of these boxes at the top. So the model is basically a 3-tiered model. We have a concept called a business domain, then we have capability groups, and we actually have the capability. So I'm going to step you through what each of those things are and why we're using them the way that we're using them. The first big box in this slide, you'll see financial management down the left-hand side, is what we call the business domain. So it's a high-level classification of capabilities that the city performs. And it can also be described as a common set of business requirements that achieve a similar purpose or objective. And the reason why we chose that definition is because a capability, or a business domain, is quite broad. And it's supposed to be because it's a big grouping of a whole bunch of different capabilities. But we chose to do it this way because if we just had a list of capabilities, there wouldn't be a way to box them into from a classification, from a structural standpoint. It wouldn't be manageable basically at the end of the day. So we're trying to put them into high-level classification so we can manage it. And then also we're trying to use the language of the business in terms of what they would classify as major quote-unquote functions. So financial management is a good example. So people in the city use financial management as a very broad term to describe what we have in this definition: monitoring, budget reporting, performance management, and sort of corporate governance from a financial standpoint. So that's a business domain. The capability group is a logical grouping of capabilities. So inside a domain, we have multiple capability groups. And by the way, I actually have a slide of all of the capability groups and all of the domains and capabilities on the last slide of this, so you'll get a sense of what we're talking about overall. But there are logical groupings of capabilities. So we're taking a particular set of capabilities that were within the various business units of the city, and they kind of possess or exchange to achieve a specific purpose, business or business outcome. And again, classify them from a functional standpoint. So I've used the example here of financial accounting. So financial management is the domain. There's actually 3 capability groupings in financial management, of which financial accounting is one of the capabilities. And it describes all the capabilities that are associated with accounting. So there's a fairly well-known model in the accounting world that includes collecting and storing of financial related events. So we're putting the capability group around that. So when we start to do business architecture, we can box that in and say the capability group that we talk about is financial accounting, and here are the capabilities associated with it, which we'll see on this slide. And under each of these capabilities, then there's processes. So a business capability is at the lowest level, and it's really a set of processes or functions that describe the major areas of components at the city. And general ledger is the example I've used here, and it's basically a comprehensive picture for accounting and accounts within the organization. So you'll see here that we have a pretty good description of what general ledger is, and as we're finding, we go out to the business units and do solutions for these things, and they say that they inside one of their solution architectures, inside one of the capability models, they need a general ledger. We're fitting it into the context of this model and say, well, when you say general ledger, this is the definition that we're using to describe that. And here, by the way, all the processes associated with it, so then we can actually reuse them. So that's in essence what the capability model is. And here's our first attempt at actually capturing all of the capabilities across the organization. I don't know if everybody can see this or not, because it's quite detailed, but it just gives you a sense of what we're dealing with, in the city. Did you have anything to talk to about this, Marianne?
Yeah, and as part of the governance process, one of the things that we're doing here is taking business architectures that have been completed and mapping them into the business capability model. And as it matures, it will become the source for the language of all of the business models. So we can show direct traceability in how any business area delivers a service by using capability A, B, X, Y, and Z, and they're combined together in order to provide that final valued output. So then we can do the analysis across the enterprise of how many services is this capability required, and also in really complex services, see how many different capabilities that need to be combined in order to produce that output. So we have a common place to tie back all of our process, all the service delivery and management processes in order to do that enterprise-wide analysis.
Yeah. So as we'll see in the example, we will map these back in. You'll see the mapping back into these capabilities. I mentioned this earlier too, but one of the other purposes that we're doing this capability model is from an application inventory perspective. So we're taking our application inventory or portfolio and now mapping capabilities into applications. And we're seeing that in that model that we have applications that actually have duplicates or actually have overlapping capabilities associated with them. So it's going to be used as a decision-making sort of framework too, to say, well, for example, we have a portfolio of applications that actually do work management or work scheduling or time recording. At the highest level, we can say that there's 10 of them, for example. We can drill down into the process level and start to say, well, are they actually duplicating functions and processes, and actually start to rationalize a little bit of our portfolio through that technique. And actually, corresponding to that too is the ability to see where we don't have automated or tools or applications to enable capabilities, to see where we do need to make investments. So that's why it's kind of important that we actually have all of our capabilities on here from an enterprise standpoint, because it should represent everything that we do, and it will be the best way to inform us to see if there's things that we need to work on from an IT perspective, for example. From an application and portfolio standpoint. So we see this model as being very key to not just our business architecture, but our overall architecture. But as I said earlier, it's the baseline or the anchor to also go back to the business areas and say, well, are these the capabilities that you do? And if you do, how are you doing them? And then again, like Marianne said, and how are they being done in other areas, so we can rationalize or we can come up with a common enterprise architecture.
So one example of one area that we're working on right now from that perspective is one of the capability groups in the service delivery is called work order management. And we have a team put together that includes Parks, Forestry and Recreation, Toronto Water, Solid Waste, and Transportation. And they all have a common problem of work management. And there is a common pattern in the way that it's done, but it's been implemented in the past in a siloed approach, and they're starting to now come together and try to understand what processes and data and procedures are common so that we can enable them with common solutions and do reporting across the enterprise, because they all have very common processes and work in common areas in the city. We need to be able to tie their work together.
Oh, thanks. So I'll take some questions on this at the end. I'm expecting some people to probably ask some questions on this particular one. The last part of this presentation is to take again, the information that we've sort of described to date and show you how we've applied it to a particular project. The example that we're going to use here is the Enterprise Document Records Management Solution. So I'll give you a quick overview of what the project is, and then get into some of the artifacts that were used, and then how it aligns with the overall model that we're trying to accomplish. So the EDRMS project at the city was actually a partnership between three divisions, INT, City Clerk's Office, and the Revenue Services Division. And in essence, the purpose was to address the issue of having many program areas across the city managing their own documents and records, using different resources, tools, and then resulting in a fragmented working environment. It was basically to come up with a common set of requirements and ultimately a common tool to manage documents and records within the organization. So from a program standpoint, we structured it as part of the information management program. So as Mary Ann sort of mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're putting a program and services orientation around our projects or around our solutions. And this one was part of the information management program at the city. I should add that this is a little bit of a unique one because traditionally a program at the city has been a division, and we were sort of breaking